In the summer of 1997, three teenage girls checked into the Mirage Hotel in Las Vegas for a graduation celebration. They were captured on security footage, laughing in the lobby at 9:47 p.m. By morning, their room was empty, the beds untouched, their belongings gone. For 26 years, no trace of Sarah Chen, Monica Reeves, or Ashley Durant was ever found, until a construction crew broke ground on a condemned property 3 miles from the Strip and unearthed something that would force investigators to reopen a case they thought had gone cold forever. If you're drawn to mysteries that refuse to let go, stories where the past bleeds into the present and truth hides in the darkest corners, subscribe now. The desert keeps secrets better than any vault. Sarah Chen's mother learned this on a scorching afternoon in June 2023, when Detective Marcus Holland appeared at her door in Henderson with an expression she recognized immediately. It was the same look he'd worn 26 years ago, when he'd first told her that her daughter was missing. Helen Chen had aged into a woman, made of sharp angles and shadows. The years of searching, of hoping, of bargaining with a universe that refused to answer, had carved away everything soft. She stood in her doorway, one hand gripping the frame, and watched the detective's mouth form words that seemed to travel through water before reaching her ears. "We found something." Not someone. Something. Helen had stopped believing in someone's a decade ago. She'd made peace with the probability that Sarah's remains would surface eventually, scattered by time and desert animals, reduced to fragments that would require dental records for identification. She'd prepared herself for that phone call, that knock on the door, that moment when possibility would collapse into certainty. But she hadn't prepared for what Detective Holland said next. "We need you to come to the station. There are items we need you to identify." He paused, and something flickered behind his eyes that Helen couldn't quite name. "And we need you to look at some photographs." Photographs? Helen's voice sounded strange to her own ears, distant and hollow. "From inside the structure where we found the items." Detective Holland shifted his weight, a tell she remembered from all those years ago. He always did that when he was about to deliver news he didn't want to share. "Mrs. Chen." The walls were covered with them. Hundreds of photographs. Some of them are of your daughter. Helen felt the world tilt slightly beneath her feet. Sarah had been gone for 26 years. She would be 44 years old now, if she was alive. If she had survived whatever had happened in that hotel room in 1997. The detective was still talking, something about evidence and processing, and the need for her to prepare herself. But Helen was no longer listening. She was remembering the last time she'd seen her daughter, standing in the driveway with an overnight bag slung over her shoulder, her dark hair catching the late afternoon sun. Sarah had been so excited about the trip, about celebrating graduation with her two best friends, about finally being old enough to see the real Las Vegas. "Mom, we're just going to see some shows and walk the Strip," Sarah had said, rolling her eyes at Helen's concerns. "We'll be back Sunday night, I promise." But Sarah Chen hadn't come back Sunday night. She hadn't come back at all. And now, 26 years later, Detective Holland was standing in Helen's doorway with news about photographs on walls and items that needed identification. And Helen felt something she hadn't felt in a very long time. Not hope, exactly. Hope had died years ago, buried in disappointment after disappointment. This was something darker and more complicated, a kind of terrible anticipation, like standing on the edge of a cliff and finally understanding that the only way forward was down. "I'll get my purse," Helen said. The Henderson Police Department looked exactly as Helen remembered it, despite the fresh coat of paint and updated furniture in the waiting area. She sat in the same interview room, where she'd spent countless hours in 1997, answering the same questions over and over, watching detectives try to hide their skepticism as she insisted that Sarah would never have run away. Detective Holland sat across from her now, older and grayer, but with the same careful intensity in his eyes. Beside him was a younger woman, who introduced herself as Detective Sarah Vega. Helen wondered if the name was coincidence or cosmic irony. "Before we begin," Detective Holland said, sliding a manila folder across the table, "I want to prepare you for what you're about to see. The photographs are disturbing, not graphic in the traditional sense, but unsettling." Helen opened the folder with steady hands. The first photograph showed a concrete room with no windows. The walls were covered, floor to ceiling, with pictures. Even in the crime scene photo, she could make out faces in the collage. Young faces, female faces. "We found this structure during demolition of an old industrial building on West Tropicana," Detective Vega explained. "It was hidden behind a false wall in the basement, completely sealed off. The demolition crew thought it was just a utility space until they broke through and found this." Helen turned to the next photograph, a closer shot of one wall. And there, among dozens of other images, was Sarah, her daughter at 17, wearing the purple tank top she'd had on the day she left for Vegas. But this photo hadn't been taken by Helen or any of their family members. This was a candid shot, taken without Sarah's knowledge. She was looking away from the camera, her expression caught mid-laugh. "How many photos of Sarah are there?" Helen's voice came out steadier than she felt. 43, Detective Holland replied. "All taken during the 3 days she was in Las Vegas. Some are from the hotel, others are from the Strip, various casinos, restaurants, but several were taken in locations we haven't been able to identify yet." Helen forced herself to look at the next image. Sarah sitting in what appeared to be a diner booth, eating French fries. The angle suggested the photographer had been sitting across from her. The casual intimacy of it made Helen's stomach turn. "Someone was following her," she said. "We believe so," Detective Vega confirmed. "We found similar photo collections of the other two girls, Monica Reeves and Ashley Durant. The same pattern, same time frame, same obsessive documentation." Helen set down the photograph, her hands beginning to tremble. "You said you found items. What items?" Detective Holland pulled a clear evidence bag from a box beside his chair. Inside was a small enamel pin in the shape of a starfish, the paint chipped and faded, but still recognizably turquoise. Helen stopped breathing. "Sarah's," she whispered. "I gave that to her for her 16th birthday. She wore it on her backpack." "We found 3 backpacks in the room," Detective Vega said softly, "along with some clothing, personal effects, and several notebooks. The notebooks are what we really need to discuss with you." Another evidence bag appeared. This one contained a spiral-bound notebook with a plain blue cover. Through the plastic, Helen could see handwriting on the visible page, neat, careful script that made her heart clench. "This is Sarah's handwriting," Detective Holland said. It wasn't a question. Helen nodded, unable to speak. She'd seen that handwriting on birthday cards, school essays, shopping lists stuck to the refrigerator. The particular way Sarah formed her lowercase i's, the slight rightward slant of her letters. "The entries are dated," Detective Vega continued. "They start on June 13th, 1997, the day the girls arrived in Las Vegas, and they continue for 6 months." The room seemed to tilt. Helen gripped the edge of the table, feeling Detective Holland's hand steady her shoulder. 6 months? She repeated. "Sarah was alive for 6 months?" "According to the journal entries, yes," Detective Holland said. "All 3 girls were." "Mrs. Chen, the journals document their time in captivity." And they provide information we never had before, information that might finally help us understand what happened to them. Helen stared at the notebook through its protective plastic barrier. This artifact of her daughter's suffering that had been hidden in darkness for over 2 decades. Sarah had been alive for 6 months. After disappearing, alive and documenting her captivity, and Helen had been searching in all the wrong places, putting up flyers, calling hospitals, imagining scenarios that were somehow both better and worse than the truth. "I want to read it," Helen said. "I want to read everything she wrote." Detective Vega and Detective Holland exchanged a glance. "Mrs. Chen," Detective Vega began carefully, "the entries are extremely difficult. They document psychological and physical abuse. They describe conditions of captivity that are deeply disturbing. We need to warn you that reading them will be traumatic." "My daughter lived it," Helen said, her voice hard as steel. "The least I can do is bear witness to what she endured. I want to read every word." The first journal entry was dated June 13th, 1997, written in Sarah's careful handwriting. "We're at the Mirage, and it's amazing. Monica keeps saying we should sneak into one of the nightclubs. Ashley thinks we'll get caught, but I kind of want to try. We got dinner at the buffet, and this guy kept staring at us. Monica said he was cute, but there was something about him that made me uncomfortable. He followed us for a while on the casino floor. We lost him near the dolphin habitat." Helen read the words 3 times, trying to reconcile the excited, carefree tone with the knowledge of what came after. This had been written hours before the girls vanished, hours before whatever happened changed everything. She sat in a small conference room at the police station, Detective Vega sitting quietly in the corner, present but unobtrusive. They'd given Helen privacy to read, but protocol required someone to be with her. Helen appreciated the detective's silence, her willingness to simply exist in the space without offering empty platitudes. The entries progressed chronologically. The second one, dated June 14th, began normally enough. Monica wanted to see a magic show, but Ashley voted for the aquarium. We compromised and did both. That guy from yesterday was at the aquarium too. I'm sure it was him. Same leather jacket, same dark hair. He was pretending to look at the sharks, but I saw him watching us in the reflection. I told the girls, but Monica said I was being paranoid. Maybe I am." Helen's chest tightened. Sarah had known something was wrong. She'd sensed the danger and documented it, and Helen felt a fierce pride cut through her grief. Her daughter had been smart, observant, careful, but it hadn't been enough. The third entry made Helen's blood run cold. June 14th late. I don't know what time. We went back to our room around midnight. Ashley wanted to watch a movie on pay-per-view. We were all in our pajamas when someone knocked on the door. Monica looked through the peephole and said it was hotel security. She opened the door. There were 2 men. They weren't hotel security. Helen's hands trembled as she turned the page. The handwriting became slightly less neat, as if written in haste or distress. They had badges, but something was wrong. One of them pushed inside and locked the door behind him. He told us to be quiet. He had something in his hand, I couldn't see what. Ashley started crying. The other man told us we were being detained for questioning about stolen property from the casino. I said we hadn't stolen anything. He said we needed to come with them to sort it out, that if we cooperated, everything would be fine. Monica asked if we could call our parents. He said after we got to the security office. I wanted to scream, but I was so scared. Ashley was shaking. They made us get dressed and pack our things. They said if we made any noise or tried to get anyone's attention, they'd arrest all of us and we'd go to jail. Monica was crying now too. They walked us out through the service corridors. We never saw another person. The entry ended there. Helen sat back in her chair, feeling sick. The girls had been manipulated, terrorized into compliance through the exploitation of their fear and youth. They'd been removed from the hotel, through areas where they wouldn't encounter witnesses, taken by men who had planned this carefully. The security footage from that night, Helen said, looking up at Detective Vega. Did you ever find anything? The tapes from the service corridors were either reused or deliberately erased. Detective Vega replied. We had footage of the girls entering the hotel, footage from the casino floor and common areas, but nothing from after midnight on June 14th. At the time, the hotel claimed it was standard protocol for those tapes to be reused every 72 hours. Do you think someone at the hotel was involved? It's one of several theories we're investigating now. Detective Vega stood and moved to the window, looking out at the desert beyond. The men who took the girls knew the hotel layout intimately. They knew which corridors avoided cameras, which routes wouldn't be staffed at that hour. That suggests either inside knowledge or extensive surveillance. Helen turned to the next entry. The date was June 15th, but Sarah's handwriting had changed. The letters were cramped, squeezed together as if she were trying to conserve space, or as if her hands had been shaking. We're in some kind of basement. Concrete walls, no windows. There are 3 mattresses on the floor and 1 bucket in the corner. The men took our phones, our bags, everything. Monica kept asking why they were doing this. One of them, the taller one with the scar on his neck, said we belonged to them now, that we were going to learn to be grateful. Ashley threw up. I can hear pipes in the walls, water running somewhere above us. Sometimes footsteps. Helen pressed her palm against her mouth, fighting back nausea. Her daughter's fear bled through every word, carefully documented in that neat script that was trying so hard to remain steady. How long do the entries continue? Helen asked. Through December 1997, Detective Vega said quietly. The final entry is dated December 19th. After that, the journal is blank. 6 months. Sarah had survived for 6 months, documenting her captivity, leaving a record of what happened. And then the words had stopped. Helen didn't need to ask what that meant. She knew. She'd known since Detective Holland had appeared at her door with that careful expression, talking about items found in a sealed room. Her daughter had been alive for 6 months, and then she hadn't been alive anymore. And for 26 years, she'd been buried in silence and darkness, her words locked away in the same tomb. I want to keep reading, Helen said, her voice barely above a whisper. I need to know everything. Detective Vega nodded, returning to her chair. Outside the window, the desert sun blazed overhead, indifferent to human suffering, indifferent to the secrets buried beneath its vast and burning emptiness. Detective Marcus Holland sat in his office at 3 a.m, unable to sleep, unable to stop reading. He'd been investigating missing persons cases for 32 years, and he'd learned to maintain professional distance. But Sarah Chen's journal entries had broken through every defense he'd carefully constructed. The notebook lay open on his desk, illuminated by the harsh fluorescent light overhead. He'd read these entries a dozen times already, and each reading revealed new details, new horrors that he'd somehow missed before. June 20th, 1997. They bring us food once a day. Always the same man, the shorter one with the glasses. He won't look at us directly. Sometimes I think he's uncomfortable with what's happening, but not uncomfortable enough to help us. Monica tried to talk to him yesterday, begging him to let us go. He acted like she wasn't even speaking, like we're not even human to him. Holland made another note on his legal pad. The descriptions of the captors were consistent throughout the entries. Two primary men, one tall with a scar on his neck, one shorter with glasses. Both appeared to be white males, based on Sarah's descriptions. Both spoke with what Sarah described as normal American accents, no regional markers. The tall one seemed to be in charge. The one with glasses appeared to be subordinate, following orders. June 25, 1997. They moved us today. Same concrete room, but different location. I could tell from the sounds. Before I heard cars sometimes, distant traffic. Now I hear nothing but silence. We drove for maybe an hour in the back of a van. Couldn't see anything. Ashley has stopped talking. She just sits against the wall and stares. Monica and I try to keep track of days, but it's getting harder. They took our watches. Time feels strange down here. The girls had been moved. That complicated everything. The room where they'd been found was on West Tropicana, but clearly they'd been held somewhere else first. Holland pulled up the case file on his computer, reviewing the original investigation. In 1997, they'd focused their search on a 15-mile radius around the Mirage. They'd interviewed hotel staff, reviewed security footage, tracked the girls' credit card usage up until they vanished. Nothing had suggested they'd left the immediate Vegas area. But they had left. They'd been driven somewhere quieter, somewhere isolated enough that Sarah heard nothing but silence. July 4th, 1997. We can hear fireworks, distant but distinct. Monica started crying because she remembered we were supposed to go to her cousin's barbecue today. I remembered that Mom always makes her special potato salad on the 4th of July. I wonder if she made it this year. I wonder if she ate it while thinking about me, or if the thought of it made her too sad to cook. I hope she's not blaming herself. None of this is her fault. I'm the one who wanted to go to Vegas. I'm the one who convinced her it would be safe. Holland closed his eyes briefly. Helen Chen had, in fact, blamed herself. He remembered her in this very building, devastated and desperate, going over every detail of the days before Sarah left, wondering if she should have said no to the trip, should have insisted on coming along, should have sensed somehow that something terrible was going to happen. He opened his eyes and continued reading. July 10th, 1997. The tall one came down today with a camera. He took pictures of us, made us sit in different positions, different parts of the room. When Monica refused, he grabbed her hair and forced her against the wall. I've never seen anyone be that calm while hurting someone. His face didn't change at all, like he was doing something completely ordinary. Ashley and I didn't fight after that. We did whatever he wanted. The camera flash kept going off, leaving spots in my vision. I counted 37 flashes before he left. Holland thought about the photographs covering the walls of that sealed room. Hundreds of them, documenting every stage of the girl's captivity. The photographer had been building a collection, a gallery of suffering. The crime scene techs were still cataloging every image, but the pattern was clear. This had been methodical, ritualized, the kind of behavior that suggested a long history of similar crimes. He pulled up another file on his computer, one he'd been compiling over the past 72 hours. Missing persons cases from Nevada and surrounding states, narrowed to females between the ages of 15 and 25. Disappearances dating back to 1985. The search parameters had returned 63 cases. Holland had been cross-referencing those cases against unsolved homicides, unidentified remains, and cold cases involving suspected abduction. 7 cases showed similarities to the Mirage Girls, young women who had vanished from Vegas or the surrounding areas, last seen in hotels or casinos, disappearances that happened cleanly, with no witnesses and no evidence. One case in particular kept drawing his attention. Jessica Martinez, 19, vanished from the Luxor Hotel in 1995. She'd been in Vegas with her boyfriend celebrating her birthday. They'd had an argument, and she'd left their room around midnight. Hotel security footage showed her walking through the casino floor, then exiting through a side door. After that, nothing. Her body had never been found. Holland pulled up the file photograph of Jessica Martinez. She had the same general appearance as Sarah, Monica, and Ashley. Young, petite, dark-haired. All the girls from those 7 similar cases shared those characteristics. It wasn't conclusive, but it was suggestive. Whoever had taken the Mirage Girls had a type. His phone buzzed. A text from Detective Vega. "Still at the station? Need to talk. Found something in the other notebooks." Holland texted back, "My office." 5 minutes later, Vega appeared in his doorway holding an evidence box. She looked as tired as Holland felt. Her eyes shadowed, her usual professional composure slightly frayed. "Monica Reeves kept track of license plate numbers," Vega said without preamble. She set the box in Holland's desk and pulled out a notebook with a red cover. She wrote them down whenever she heard vehicles near wherever they were being held. Holland leaned forward, his exhaustion forgotten. "How many?" 14 distinct plates, over 6 months. Vega opened the notebook, showing pages filled with Monica's handwriting. Unlike Sarah's neat script, Monica's was messy, urgent, the numbers and letters sometimes running together. She noted the dates, approximate times, and whether the vehicle was arriving or leaving. She was smart, detective. She was documenting everything she could, in case someone ever found her notes. "Have we run the plates?" "Running them now." Vega sat down heavily in the chair across from his desk. "But there's something else. Ashley Durant's notebook is different from the other 2. She wasn't documenting what was happening. She was trying to figure out who was doing it to them." Vega pulled out a 3rd notebook, this one with a green cover. She opened it carefully, and Holland saw pages filled with sketches, faces, partial profiles, details of clothing and jewelry. Ashley had been drawing their captors. "She was an art student," Vega said quietly. "Planned to study illustration at UCLA. She used her skills to create a record." The sketches were remarkably detailed. One showed a man's face in 3/4 profile. Sharp nose, heavy brow, a distinctive scar running from his ear down the left side of his neck. Another showed a pair of hands, broad and thick-fingered, with a gold ring on the right index finger. "These are good enough for facial recognition," Holland said, already reaching for his phone. "We need to get these to the tech unit immediately." "Already done," Vega replied. "I sent digital scans an hour ago. But detective, there's one more thing you need to see." She turned to the final pages of Ashley's notebook. The last sketch was different from the others. It showed the concrete room from Ashley's perspective, the walls still bare, before the photographs had been mounted. And in the center of the room stood a figure, rendered in careful detail. Not one of the captors, someone else, someone smaller, slighter, wearing what appeared to be maintenance coveralls. Below the sketch, Ashley had written a single line. "He watches through the vent. Sometimes he cries." Helen Chen hadn't slept in 3 days. She sat at her kitchen table surrounded by photographs, news clippings, and printouts from internet searches she'd conducted in the dark hours before dawn. Detective Holland had advised her to go home, to rest, to let the police handle the investigation. But Helen had spent 26 years waiting for answers, and now that she finally had a thread to pull, she couldn't stop. Sarah's journal entries had mentioned hearing water in the pipes, the sound of it rushing through the walls above them. Helen had become fixated on that detail, convinced it meant something. In Vegas, water was precious, carefully controlled and distributed. The sound of running water, constant and loud, enough to hear through concrete walls, suggested a specific type of location. She'd made a list: industrial laundries, car washes, commercial kitchens, water treatment facilities, places where water flowed constantly, where basements might exist, where young women could be hidden in plain sight, beneath the ordinary business of the city above them. Her phone rang, startling her out of her thoughts. Detective Vega's name appeared on the screen. "Mrs. Chen, I need you to come to the station," Vega said without preamble. "We've identified one of the men from Ashley's sketches." Helen was in her car within minutes, driving through the early morning streets of Henderson, with her hands clenched on the steering wheel. The desert sun was just beginning to rise, painting the sky in shades of amber and rose, beautiful and indifferent to the darkness buried beneath its light. The police station was busier than she'd expected for 6 in the morning. Officers moved with purpose through the corridors, voices clipped and urgent. Something had shifted in the investigation. Helen could feel it in the air, the electric tension of a case breaking open. Detective Vega met her in the lobby, her expression carefully neutral, but Helen could see the suppressed energy beneath her professional mask. "We ran Ashley's sketches through facial recognition," Vega explained as they walked. "We got a hit. Thomas Wayne Mercer, 57 years old, currently residing in Boulder City. He has a record. Assault charges in 1994, dropped due to lack of evidence. Suspected involvement in a kidnapping case in 1989, never charged. He worked security at various Vegas hotels throughout the 90s, including the Mirage." Helen's breath caught. "He was at the Mirage when Sarah disappeared? He was fired 3 weeks before your daughter's trip. Sexual harassment complaints from female staff members. The hotel paid him severance to avoid litigation." Vega's voice was tight with controlled anger. "We're executing a search warrant on his residence right now. I thought you'd want to know." They entered a conference room where Detective Holland stood in front of a large monitor, watching a live feed from what appeared to be body camera footage. Helen could see officers approaching a small house, could hear their shouted commands, the crack of a door being breached. "Thomas Mercer?" an officer's voice called out through the speakers. "Police, show yourself." The camera swept through a cluttered living room, down a hallway into a bedroom. Helen watched, her heart hammering against her ribs as officers cleared each room. The house appeared empty. "Check the garage," Holland said into his radio. The body camera moved outside, around to a detached garage at the back of the property. The officer tried the door, found it locked, then forced it open with a crowbar. The camera showed a dark space, and Helen leaned forward, straining to see. Then the officer's flashlight illuminated the interior, and Helen heard someone gasp. It might have been her. The garage walls were covered in photographs, just like the sealed room on West Tropicana. But these were different. These were older. Dozens of faces, young women Helen didn't recognize, captured in moments of fear and desperation. The collection of a serial predator. "Jesus Christ," Detective Holland breathed. The camera panned across the wall, and Helen saw her daughter's face among the others. Sarah at 17, her expression caught in that terrible moment of realization that something was wrong. But there were so many others. So many girls whose faces Helen didn't know, whose families might still be waiting for answers, whose disappearances might finally make sense. "Detective, you need to see this." Another officer's voice crackled through the radio. "There's a trapdoor in the floor. It's locked from the outside." Helen watched the screen as officers pried open the trapdoor, revealing a ladder descending into darkness. The officer with the body camera climbed down slowly, his flashlight cutting through the black. And Helen saw, with perfect, terrible clarity. Another concrete room. Bare walls, a single mattress on the floor, empty food containers stacked in the corner. But no one inside. The room was empty. "Where is he?" Holland said into the radio. "Where the hell is Thomas Mercer?" Vega's phone buzzed. She answered it, listened for a moment, then turned to Holland with a stricken expression. "Boulder City PD just found a vehicle registered to Mercer," she said. "It's parked at a shopping center near the Arizona border. There's blood in the trunk and a hotel key card on the dashboard." Holland's face went pale. "What hotel?" Vega looked at the phone screen, then back at Holland. Her voice was barely above a whisper. "The Mirage." The room fell silent. Outside the window, the desert sun climbed higher, burning away the last shadows of morning. And somewhere in Las Vegas, Thomas Wayne Mercer was free, carrying 26 years of secrets and an unknown number of victims in his wake. The investigation that had seemed to be closing was suddenly tearing wide open, revealing depths of horror that no one had fully anticipated. Helen stared at the monitor, at the empty concrete room beneath Thomas Mercer's garage, at the photographs of countless young women covering his walls. And she understood with sickening clarity that Sarah's story was only one thread in a web of disappearances that stretched back decades. The Mirage Girls weren't the beginning. They might not even be the end. "He knows we found the room on Tropicana," Holland said, his voice tight. "He knows we're coming for him. The hotel keycard is a message." "Or a trap," Vega added. Helen found her voice, though it came out rough and strained. "Or there's someone else, someone at the Mirage right now, who needs help." The detectives exchanged a look, and Helen saw her fear reflected in their faces. Thomas Mercer had been collecting victims for decades, documenting their suffering, hiding them in rooms beneath the city's bright surface. He'd built a gallery of pain in that sealed room on Tropicana. And now, he was back at the Mirage, the place where it had all started, with a hotel key card and blood in his trunk. "Get units to the Mirage," Holland said, already moving toward the door. "Every available officer, and get hotel security to pull up their guest registry. If Mercer is there, I want him found. If there's a victim, I want her alive." As the room erupted into controlled chaos, officers mobilizing, radios crackling with urgent communication, Helen remained frozen in place, staring at the monitor, at her daughter's face among all those others, at the evidence of systematic predation that had operated in the shadows of Las Vegas for decades, while the city sparkled and dazzled and drew in new visitors by the millions. The desert kept secrets, but sometimes, when you started digging, you found that the secrets went deeper than anyone had imagined. And the truth, when it finally surfaced, was more terrible than any lie. The Mirage Hotel looked exactly as it had in 1997, at least from the outside. The iconic volcano still erupted on schedule for tourists who gathered along the sidewalk with phones raised. The golden towers still gleamed in the Nevada sun. But as Detective Holland pulled into the parking structure, with Vega beside him and Helen Chen in the back seat, the building felt different, haunted somehow by the knowledge of what had happened within its walls 26 years ago. "You shouldn't be here," Holland said to Helen, not for the first time since she'd insisted on coming. "My daughter walked through those doors and never came back," Helen replied quietly. "If there's a chance someone else's daughter is in there right now, I need to be here." They met the hotel's head of security, Marcus Webb, in a windowless office behind the casino floor. He was younger than Holland had expected, maybe 40, with the careful posture of someone trained in law enforcement. Former military, Holland guessed, from the bearing and the haircut. We've pulled the registry for the past 72 hours, Webb said, spreading printouts across his desk. No one checked in under the name. Thomas Mercer. We ran the photo you sent against our facial recognition system. No matches in the casino, restaurants, or common areas. What about the key card found in his vehicle? Vega asked. Can you trace it? Webb typed on his computer, frowning at the screen. Room 2847. It was coded 3 days ago for a guest named Robert Mitchell. Checked in alone. Paid cash for 3 nights. Checkout scheduled for today. We need access to that room, Holland said. Now. Security is already stationed outside the door, Webb replied. We've evacuated the adjacent rooms quietly. No one in or out since we got your call. They moved through the hotel quickly, Webb leading them to a service elevator that bypassed the main casino floor. Helen followed, her presence a violation of protocol that Holland didn't have the heart to fight. She'd earned the right to be here, had paid for it in 26 years of grief and unanswered questions. The 28th floor was eerily quiet. 2 security officers stood flanking the door to room 2847, their expressions tense. Holland could see the Do Not Disturb sign hanging from the handle, innocuous and sinister all at once. Has anyone tried to enter or leave? Vega asked the officers. Negative, one of them replied. Been here 20 minutes, haven't heard any movement inside. Holland drew his weapon, nodding to Vega to do the same. Webb swiped his master key card, and the lock clicked open with a soft beep that seemed too loud in the carpeted hallway. Police, Holland called, pushing the door open. Thomas Mercer, if you're in here, show yourself. The room was dark, curtains drawn against the afternoon sun. Holland's eyes adjusted slowly to the dimness, taking in the unmade bed, the scattered clothing, the room service tray on the desk, with its contents untouched. The bathroom door stood ajar, light spilling from within. Vega moved to clear the bathroom, while Holland checked the closet. Both came back with negative results. The room appeared empty. He's gone, Vega said, holstering her weapon. But Helen had moved past them, drawn to something on the desk. Holland turned to see her standing over a laptop computer, its screen glowing in the darkness. She'd touched the trackpad, waking it from sleep, and now she stared at what it displayed with an expression of horror. Holland crossed the room quickly, looking over her shoulder at the screen. It showed a live video feed, a concrete room with bare walls, and in the center of the frame, bound to a chair with duct tape across her mouth, was a young woman. Dark-haired, petite, maybe 19 or 20. Her eyes were wide with terror, darting around the room, as if searching for escape. Jesus! Vega breathed beside him. Is this live? Holland checked the timestamp on the video player. The feed was real-time, updating continuously. In the corner of the screen, he could see a digital clock, counting seconds. He's watching her right now, Helen said, her voice hollow. Or he wants us to watch her. Vega was already on her phone, calling the tech unit. I need a trace on a video feed. We need the source location immediately. Holland leaned closer to the screen, studying the room in the video feed. The walls looked familiar, the same concrete texture he'd seen in the crime scene photos from the sealed room on Tropicana. But this wasn't that room. The dimensions were different, and there was something in the corner that caught his attention. A ventilation grate, mounted low on the wall. He thought about Ashley Durant's final sketch, the figure watching through the vent. There's someone else, Holland said aloud. Someone who was there when the girls were held. Ashley drew him. She said he watched and cried. Webb had moved to the desk, checking drawers. He pulled out a folder and opened it, his face going pale. Detective, you need to see this. The folder contained photographs, recent ones, printed on glossy paper. The same young woman from the video feed, captured in various locations around Las Vegas. Shopping on the Strip, eating at a restaurant, laughing with friends outside a nightclub. The photos were candid, taken without her knowledge, documenting her movements just as Thomas Mercer had documented Sarah Chen and her friends 26 years ago. And clipped to the inside of the folder was a handwritten note in neat, careful script. Her name is Rebecca Torres. She's been in Vegas for 4 days, celebrating her 20th birthday with college friends. She's staying at the Luxor in room 1642. She doesn't know I'm watching her. She doesn't know she's already mine. By the time you read this, she'll understand what it means to disappear, just like the others understood, just like they all understand. Eventually, in those final moments when hope dies and only truth remains. Helen made a sound like she'd been punched, and Holland realized she was crying silently, tears streaming down her face as she stared at the note. This was what had happened to Sarah. This same calculated stalking, this same methodical documentation of a victim's final days of freedom. The Luxor, Vega said sharply into her phone. Get units to the Luxor immediately. Guest name Rebecca Torres, room 1642. We need to confirm she's safe. But Holland was staring at the video feed, at the timestamp counting seconds in the corner. If the note was accurate, if Rebecca Torres had already been taken, then she was in that concrete room right now. And they had no idea where that room was. How long for the trace? He demanded. Text says 10 minutes minimum, Vega replied, her voice tight with frustration. 10 minutes. Holland looked at the young woman on the screen, at the fear in her eyes, at the way she was trying to work her hands free from the bindings. 10 minutes might be too long. On the video feed, a door opened in the background, just visible at the edge of the frame. A figure entered the room, moving with deliberate slowness. Rebecca Torres's eyes went wide, and even without sound, Holland could see her trying to scream behind the tape. God, Helen whispered, we're watching it happen. The figure moved closer to Rebecca, and the camera angle caught his face in profile. Thomas Wayne Mercer, older than his booking photo but unmistakable. The scar on his neck stood out starkly in the harsh overhead lighting of the concrete room. He was carrying something, but the video quality made it difficult to see clearly. Then Mercer turned slightly, looking directly at the camera, and he smiled. He knew they were watching. He'd wanted them to watch. This wasn't just about Rebecca Torres. This was a message, a demonstration of power, a reminder that even after 26 years, even with the police closing in, Thomas Mercer could still take a young woman and make her disappear into his carefully constructed nightmare. Holland's phone buzzed. A text from the tech unit. Source located, cross-referencing with property records. Stand by. On the screen, Mercer reached toward Rebecca Torres, his hand moving toward her face, and the feed suddenly cut to black. The address came through 3 minutes later. An abandoned water treatment facility on the outskirts of North Las Vegas, shuttered since 2003, slated for demolition, but caught in legal disputes over environmental cleanup. The kind of place that existed in bureaucratic limbo, forgotten by everyone except those who needed a place to hide terrible secrets. Holland drove with lights and sirens blazing, Vega coordinating with tactical units and over the radio. Helen sat in the back seat, silent and pale, watching the city blur past the windows. The glittering strip gave way to industrial zones, which gave way to empty lots and abandoned buildings, the desert reclaiming what humans had briefly tried to tame. You need to stay in the vehicle when we arrive, Holland said, catching Helen's eyes in the rearview mirror. This isn't negotiable, Mrs. Chen. If Mercer is there, this could turn into a hostage situation. We can't have civilians in the line of fire. Helen nodded, but Holland could see the determination in her face. She'd come this far. She wouldn't be left behind now. The water treatment facility rose from the desert, like a monument to decay. Massive concrete structures, holding tanks, and machinery left to rust under the relentless sun. Chain-link fencing surrounded the property, but sections had been cut away or knocked down over the years. A perfect place for someone to come and go, unnoticed. Tactical units were already establishing a perimeter when Holland arrived. He parked behind an armored vehicle and stepped out into the heat, feeling it hit him like a physical force. Vega joined him, along with the tactical commander, a barrel-chested man named Rodriguez, who'd been briefing his team. "We've got eyes on 2 possible entry points," Rodriguez said, pointing to a tactical map spread across the hood of his vehicle. "Main administration building here and a secondary maintenance structure here. Both show signs of recent use, fresh tire tracks, disturbed sand around the entrances." The video feed came from underground, Vega said. That room had the same characteristics as the sealed room on Tropicana. Concrete walls, industrial lighting, ventilation. Look for basement access, tunnels, anything below ground level. Rodriguez nodded, speaking into his radio. "All units, priority search for subterranean access points. Suspect is considered armed and extremely dangerous. Possible hostage situation." Holland pulled out his phone, bringing up the freeze frame he'd captured from the video feed before it cut out. The image showed Mercer's face in profile, that terrible smile, and behind him, partially visible through an open doorway, what appeared to be a corridor. Concrete walls with exposed pipes running along the ceiling. "The utility tunnels," Holland said, studying the image. "Water treatment facilities have extensive underground tunnel systems for pipe access and maintenance. That's where he's keeping her." They moved in with tactical precision, Rodriguez's team taking point, while Holland and Vega followed at a safer distance. The main administration building was unlocked, its door hanging open on rusted hinges. Inside, the air was stale and thick with the smell of decay and abandonment. Graffiti covered the walls, and debris littered the floor. But beneath the expected signs of neglect, there were other markers, recent footprints in the dust. A path cleared through the debris. Someone had been using this building regularly. "Here," one of the tactical officers called from the end of a hallway. "Stairs leading down." Holland approached carefully, looking down into darkness. The stairwell descended into shadow, the concrete steps worn and cracked, but recently used. At the bottom, he could see a faint glow of light. "He's down there," Holland said quietly. Rodriguez organized his team, sending 4 officers down with night vision and weapons drawn. Holland and Vega followed, their own weapons ready, moving as silently as possible down the stairs. The temperature dropped as they descended, the desert heat giving way to underground cool. The glow at the bottom came from battery-powered lanterns, positioned at intervals along a corridor that stretched in both directions. The tactical officers split up, half going left, half going right. Holland's group went right, moving through the tunnel with practiced caution. The pipes overhead were larger than Holland had expected, remnants of a system designed to move thousands of gallons of water. Now they were dry and silent, gathering dust in the darkness. They passed several doors, all locked, all marked with faded labels, indicating pump stations or electrical substations. Then they reached a door that was different, newer, recently installed, and it stood slightly ajar. Rodriguez raised his fist, signaling a halt. He and 2 other officers positioned themselves on either side of the door. Holland and Vega held back, waiting, barely breathing. Rodriguez pushed the door open with his boot. The tactical lights illuminated a small concrete room, maybe 10 feet square. Empty, except for a folding table against one wall. And on that table sat another laptop computer, its screen glowing in the darkness. Holland moved to the computer, his heart sinking. The screen showed another video feed, the same concrete room as before. But Rebecca Torres was no longer alone. Thomas Mercer sat beside her, one hand resting on her shoulder, in a gesture that was almost paternal, almost gentle. And in his other hand, he held a knife. He looked directly at the camera and mouthed words that Holland could lip-read clearly. Too slow. Then the feed cut to black again. Damn it, Rodriguez swore. He's playing with us. This is all misdirection. Holland stared at the blank screen, frustration burning in his chest. Mercer had led them here deliberately, knowing they'd trace the video signal, knowing they'd find this room. While they'd been racing to this location, he'd been somewhere else, somewhere they hadn't anticipated. He's got multiple locations, Vega said, her voice tight. Multiple rooms set up. He can move between them. Holland's phone rang. He answered without looking at the caller ID. Detective Holland? It was Marcus Webb from the Mirage. Sir, you need to get back here immediately. What is it? We found something in the ventilation system. Behind the walls on the 28th floor, there's space. Old maintenance corridors that were sealed off during renovations in 2005. And sir, they're not empty. Holland felt ice water flood his veins. What did you find? Webb's voice was shaken, the professional composure finally cracking. Clothing, personal effects, identification cards for at least 6 different women. And, detective, there's a tunnel. It goes down through the building infrastructure. We don't know where it leads, but the dust has been disturbed. Someone's been using it recently? Holland looked at Vega, seeing his own realization reflected in her face. The Mirage. It had always been the Mirage, the place where Sarah Chen and her friends had disappeared 26 years ago. The place where Thomas Mercer had worked security. The place where he'd learned the layout, studied the hidden spaces, understood how to move through the building unseen. He'd never really left. He'd been there all along, operating in the spaces between walls, in the sealed corridors and forgotten maintenance tunnels, building his gallery of victims right beneath the feet of thousands of tourists who came to see magic shows and win jackpots. We're coming back, Holland said. Seal off that area. Don't let anyone near those tunnels. He ended the call and turned to Rodriguez. We're at the wrong location. He's at the Mirage. He's been at the Mirage the whole time. They ran for the vehicles, leaving, the empty water treatment facility behind. As they emerged into the brutal sunlight of the desert afternoon, Holland saw Helen Chen standing beside their car, her phone pressed to her ear, her face transformed by something between hope and horror. She lowered the phone as they approached. That was Detective Webb, she said, her voice shaking. He said to tell you they found something else in those walls. A person. Alive. Holland stopped breathing for a moment. Rebecca Torres? Helen shook her head slowly. He said they don't know who it is yet, but it's a man, and he keeps saying the same thing over and over. She paused, tears streaming down her face. He keeps saying, I'm sorry. I should have helped them. I'm so sorry. The watcher in the vent. The figure from Ashley Durant's sketch. After 26 years, he was still there, still trapped in the spaces between walls, still carrying the guilt of his silence. Holland ran for the car, knowing they were racing against time, against a man who'd been perfecting his craft for decades, against the terrible geometry of a building that held more secrets than any of them had imagined. The Mirage's maintenance tunnels were a labyrinth of concrete and metal, descending through decades of architectural additions and renovations. Holland moved through them with tactical officers flanking him, their flashlights cutting through darkness that felt suffocating and alive. The air smelled of mildew and something else, something organic and wrong, that made his stomach turn. They'd found the man 20 minutes ago, huddled in a crawl space behind the 28th floor, emaciated and filthy, his eyes wild with fear and guilt. He'd given them a name, Christopher Vance, and a story that made Holland's blood run cold. He'd been a maintenance worker at the Mirage in 1997, a young man of 22 who'd stumbled onto Thomas Mercer's secret. He'd seen things through the ventilation grates, heard sounds that didn't belong in the clean, bright world above. And Mercer had given him a choice, help or become another victim. Christopher had helped. For 26 years, he'd brought food, carried away waste, maintained the hidden rooms that Mercer had built in the forgotten spaces of the building. He'd become a ghost, living in the walls, sustained by his captors' scraps and his own crushing shame. He'd watched girls die and done nothing. Until now, when faced with police, when the weight of his silence had finally become unbearable, he'd told them everything. The tunnels went deeper than the building's official blueprints showed, down to subterranean levels that predated the current structure, remnants of earlier construction that had been built over rather than demolished. Mercer had discovered them, expanded them, created a kingdom beneath the neon and glamour of the Strip. Movement ahead. One of the tactical officers whispered into his radio. Holland saw it too. A flicker of light in the distance, the beam of a flashlight or lantern moving through the darkness. They advanced carefully, weapons drawn, hearts hammering. The tunnel opened into a larger space, and Holland found himself in a room he recognized from the video feed. Concrete walls, industrial lighting, and in the center, still bound to the chair, was Rebecca Torres. But Thomas Mercer was gone. Clear, the tactical officers called, sweeping the space quickly. Suspect not present. Holland rushed to Rebecca, removing the tape from her mouth, while an officer cut the bindings on her wrists and ankles. She sobbed with relief, gasping for air, her body shaking with shock and exhaustion. "You're safe," Holland said gently. "You're safe now." "He was just here," Rebecca choked out. "He heard you coming. He said he always has another exit. He said I was lucky, but the next one wouldn't be." Vega was already examining the room, searching for the exit Mercer had used. She found it behind a false panel in the wall, a narrow passage that led into darkness. The tactical team immediately moved to pursue, but Holland knew it was futile. Mercer had been operating in these tunnels for decades. He knew every passage, every hiding place, every way out. But as they helped Rebecca to her feet, guiding her toward the exit and medical attention waiting above, Holland heard something. A voice echoing through the tunnels, distorted by distance and acoustics, but unmistakably Mercer's. "You think this is over?" The voice seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere. "I've been doing this since before you were a cop, Holland. I'll be doing it long after you retire. You found one room, one collection. But there are others, in other cities, other buildings, places you'll never find, girls you'll never save. And every time you close your eyes, you'll wonder which hotel you're walking past has another room like this, another girl like Sarah, another man like Christopher, who's too afraid to help." The voice faded into silence, leaving only the drip of water somewhere in the darkness and the ragged breathing of the officers around him. Holland stood in that concrete room, staring at the passage where Mercer had vanished, and felt the terrible weight of knowledge settle on his shoulders. Rebecca Torres would survive. Christopher Vance would testify. They'd found evidence that would tie Mercer to decades of disappearances, but the man himself had slipped away into the vast underground network he'd spent years creating, and Holland understood with sickening certainty that this wasn't an ending. It was barely even a beginning. Above them, the Mirage Hotel continued its 24-hour cycle of arrival and departure, thousands of visitors checking in and out, drawn by the promise of luck and transformation. And beneath their feet, in the spaces they'd never see, the evidence of Thomas Mercer's obsession waited in the darkness. Not just victims, but a system, a methodology, a template he could reproduce anywhere he chose to operate. Vega touched Holland's arm. "We need to go. Get Rebecca to the hospital. Start processing the scene." Holland nodded, forcing himself to move. They had saved one life today. That had to count for something. But as they made their way back through the tunnels, he couldn't shake the feeling that Mercer was still watching, still documenting, still adding to his collection of suffering. Somewhere in the vast underground darkness of Las Vegas, or perhaps already in another city entirely, Thomas Wayne Mercer was free. And he was patient, and he would wait for the world to forget before he took his next victim. The desert kept secrets, but Thomas Mercer had learned to keep them better. Helen Chen stood in the Henderson Police Department's evidence room 6 months later, looking at a wall covered in photographs. Not Mercer's photographs, but the police's reconstruction. A timeline of disappearances spanning 4 decades, 73 young women, whose cases had been connected to Thomas Wayne Mercer through evidence found in the Mirage tunnels and his other properties. Sarah's photo was there, third from the left, in the 1997 row. 17 years old, smiling, unaware that she had only days left to live. Beside her were Monica Reeves and Ashley Durant, the 3 Mirage Girls reunited in death as they'd been in life. Thomas Mercer had never been caught. Despite the massive manhunt, despite the evidence, despite Christopher Vance's testimony and the FBI's involvement, Mercer had vanished completely. There had been reported sightings in Phoenix, in Reno, in Los Angeles, but none had been confirmed. He'd become a ghost story, a legend whispered about in law enforcement circles and true crime forums. The man who built rooms in the spaces between walls. Rebecca Torres had survived, though the psychological scars would take years to heal. She'd testified before grand juries, helped identify other victims from photographs found in Mercer's collection, become an advocate for missing persons. Her survival was a small light in an ocean of darkness. Christopher Vance was in a psychiatric facility, facing charges, but also receiving treatment for the complex trauma of his captivity and complicity. His testimony had been crucial. His maps of the tunnel systems had revealed the full extent of Mercer's operation. But Helen couldn't bring herself to hate him. He'd been a victim too, in his own way, trapped by fear, by Mercer's manipulation, by the terrible choice he'd been given at 22 years old. Detective Holland had retired 3 months ago, unable to continue after Mercer's escape. Helen had attended his retirement party, where everyone had pretended it was by choice, pretended the haunted look in his eyes was just exhaustion. She'd thanked him for never giving up on Sarah, and he'd simply nodded, words failing him in the face of their shared knowledge that the case wasn't really solved. It was just paused. The journals were what Helen returned to, most often. Sarah's words, Monica's license plate numbers, Ashley's sketches. The record of their captivity had been published with the family's permission, the proceeds going to organizations that helped find missing persons. Helen had read the entries so many times she could recite them from memory. Each word was precious, proof that Sarah had existed, had fought, had documented her experience in the hope that someone would someday bear witness. The final entry, dated December 19, 1997, was the hardest to read. It's been 6 months. The tall one says we've been good, that we've learned. But I see something in his eyes that wasn't there before. A finality. Monica is too weak to stand anymore. Ashley hasn't spoken in days. I think this is the last time I'll write. If someone finds this, please tell my mom I love her. Tell her I thought about her every day. Tell her none of this was her fault. Tell her I'm sorry I didn't fight harder. Tell her I was brave until the very end. Helen traced her daughter's handwriting with one finger, feeling tears slide down her cheeks. Sarah had been brave. They all had been. They'd survived for 6 months in conditions designed to break them, and they'd left behind evidence that had broken open a case spanning decades. The recovered remains from the water treatment facility had been identified through DNA. Sarah Chen, Monica Reeves, and Ashley Durant, buried together in an unmarked grave in the desert, finally brought home after 26 years. Helen had been able to give her daughter a proper funeral, to lay her to rest beside her father in the cemetery overlooking Henderson. It wasn't enough. It would never be enough. But it was something. Detective Vega appeared in the doorway, her expression gentle. "Mrs. Chen, the press conference is about to start." Helen nodded, taking one last look at the wall of faces. 73 known victims. How many unknown ones were there? How many rooms had Mercer built that they'd never discovered? How many families were still waiting for answers that might never come? "I'm ready," Helen said. The press conference was being held to announce new federal task force dedicated to investigating hotel and casino security in Nevada, new protocols for tracking missing persons, new training for staff to recognize signs of human trafficking and predation. Sarah's Law, they were calling it. It wouldn't bring anyone back, but it might prevent future disappearances. It might save lives. Helen stood at the podium, before a crowd of reporters and cameras, her hands gripping the edges of the wood to keep them steady. Behind her, photographs of the 3 Mirage Girls were displayed. Forever 17, forever 18, forever frozen. In the moment before everything changed. 26 years ago, Helen began, her voice clear and strong. My daughter Sarah Chen walked into the Mirage Hotel for what should have been a fun weekend with friends. She never walked out. For more than 2 decades, I searched for answers. I put up flyers, called tip lines, never stopped hoping. And while I searched, a predator operated in the shadows, building a gallery of suffering beneath the bright lights of this city. She paused, looking directly at the cameras, knowing that somewhere Thomas Wayne Mercer might be watching. Thomas Mercer is still out there. But because of the courage of the women he victimized, because of the evidence they left behind, because of people like Rebecca Torres, who survived to tell their stories, we know the truth now. We know his methods, his patterns, his obsessions, and we will never stop looking for him. Every hotel room, every basement, every hidden space will be a potential trap for him now, because people are watching. People are aware. The shadows he operated in have been exposed to light. Helen's voice strengthened, carrying the weight of 26 years of grief and determination. My daughter left behind a journal that documented her captivity. In it, she wrote about hope, about resistance, about refusing to let her captor erase who she was. She remained Sarah Chen until the very end, and now her story, and the stories of all his victims, will ensure that Thomas Mercer can never operate in anonymity again. We've taken away his greatest weapon, our ignorance. As the press conference concluded and reporters shouted questions, Helen stepped away from the podium, feeling something she hadn't felt in decades. Not closure, because there could be no closure while Mercer remained free, but purpose. Sarah's death would have meaning. The Mirage Girls would be remembered not just as victims, but as the ones whose evidence had finally shone light into the darkest corners. Outside the police station, the desert sun blazed overhead, relentless and burning. Helen stood for a moment in its heat, letting it wash over her, thinking about secrets and silence and the terrible patience of predators who built rooms in forgotten places. The desert kept secrets, but not forever. Eventually the sand shifted, the wind changed, and what had been buried found its way back to the surface. Sarah had made sure of that. In her careful documentation, in her refusal to be erased, she'd planted the seeds of her own discovery. And somewhere, in another city, in another hotel, Thomas Mercer was watching the news coverage and understanding that his perfect system had been compromised. The spaces between walls would never be quite as safe again. Every building would now be suspect. Every basement searched more carefully. Every missing person investigated with new protocols and new awareness. Helen walked to her car, carrying Sarah's journal in her purse, the weight of it both burden and comfort. Her daughter's words would live on. The Mirage Girls would not be forgotten. And somewhere, someday, Thomas Wayne Mercer would make a mistake. He would underestimate the determination of the people hunting him. He would believe too strongly in his own invisibility. And when that day came, Helen would be there, still watching, still waiting, still bearing witness to her daughter's courage and the terrible truth that some disappearances are never truly solved, only transformed into something else, into awareness, into action, into a promise that the next girl who walks into a hotel room in Las Vegas or anywhere else will be safer because of the ones who didn't walk out. The desert kept secrets, but Helen Chen had learned to make secrets speak.